The Kamar scout ship spiraled out of control, its pilot's life hanging by a thread. Human tactical officer. Scott Dixon's eyes widened as he realized the vessel was non-combatant. His superior's order to destroy it rang in his ears, but Scott's mind raced for an alternative. "Sir, permission to use the tractor beam," Scott said, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around him. The bridge of the UES Defiant shuddered as enemy fire impacted their shields. Alarms blared, and crew members shouted status reports. The battle between human and Komar forces raged across the starscape, transforming the once peaceful, disputed system into a war zone. Captain Reeves turned to Scott, confusion etched on his face. "Tractor beam? We're in the middle of a firefight, Dixon." Scott's fingers flew across his console. "It's a civilian ship, sir. We can pull it into our hangar, gather intel instead of destroying potential assets." The captain hesitated for a split second before nodding. "Do it." The Defiant's tractor beam lanced out, enveloping the small Komar vessel. As it drew the ship in, Komar reinforcements arrived, their energy weapons lighting up space. The human vessel rocked under the assault. "All hands, brace for emergency warp," Captain Reeves bellowed. The stars stretched into lines as the Defiant leapt to faster-than-light speed, leaving the battle behind. Once they were safely away, Scott found himself summoned to the captain's ready room. "That was a risky move, Dixon," Reeves said, his tone stern. "You disobeyed a direct order." Scott stood at attention. "Yes, sir. I believe the potential intelligence gain outweighed the risk." Reeves sighed. "You're not wrong, but don't make a habit of it. Now, go question our guest." In the brig, Scott faced the young Komar female. Her large, multifaceted eyes blinked rapidly as she took in his appearance. "I am Kaid," she said, her translator struggling with the human language. "Why did you save me? Your tactics are primitive." Scott raised an eyebrow. "Primitive?" Kaid gestured with her upper limbs. "Physical maneuvers? Projectile weapons? Where are your predictive algorithms? Your energy cannons?" "Sometimes the oldest tricks work best," Scott replied with a small smile. "Human unpredictability is our strength." As Kaid reluctantly shared information about Komar fleet movements, Scott's mind was already formulating a plan. The captain's decision to use this intelligence for a surprise attack on a Komar outpost would require all of Scott's primitive tactical knowledge. Meanwhile, Kaid found herself escorted to guest quarters with limited access to the ship's scientific facilities. Under guard, she began studying human technology, her initial disdain slowly giving way to fascination. As preparations for the attack commenced, tensions aboard the Defiant rose. Scott's fellow officers questioned his judgment in sparing Kaid, their whispers following him through the corridors. But Scott remained focused on the task at hand, grappling with his duty to humanity and his growing curiosity about the alien scientist. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test not only Scott's tactical abilities, but also his convictions. As he pored over star charts and sensor data, Scott couldn't shake the feeling that this unconventional encounter might change the course of the war, and perhaps even the relationship between their species. Scott's fingers danced across the tactical console, inputting commands with practiced efficiency. The bridge of the UES Defiant hummed with nervous energy as the crew prepared for their assault on the Komar outpost. He glanced at the chronometer, noting that he had just enough time for one more conversation with Kaid before the operation began. As he made his way to the guest quarters, Scott found himself lost in thought. What had started as simple intelligence gathering had evolved into something far more complex. Kaid's initial disdain for human technology had given way to a genuine curiosity that Scott found both refreshing and intriguing. The door slid open, revealing Kaid hunched over a datapad, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the scrolling information. She looked up as Scott entered, her upper limbs twitching in what he had come to recognize as a gesture of greeting. "Scott Dixon," she said, her translator still struggling with the nuances of human names. "I have been analyzing your ship's power distribution systems. The redundancies are unexpected." Scott smiled, settling into a chair across from her. "We humans like to have backup plans for our backup plans. It saved our hides more than once. Cade's head tilted, a sign of consideration. Indeed, I am beginning to see the logic in your seeming illogic. As they delved into a discussion about human and Komar engineering principles, Scott found himself marveling at how quickly Cade grasped complex concepts. Her insights into Komar technology had been invaluable in developing his battle strategy, but he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that he was betraying his duty by sharing so much with her. Their conversation was interrupted by the harsh buzz of the ship's intercom. "Lieutenant Dixon to the bridge," Captain Reeves's voice crackled through the speaker. Scott stood, his expression turning serious. "Duty calls," he said, offering Cade a small nod before exiting. As the door closed behind him, Scott nearly collided with Lieutenant Commander Marcus Hawkins. The veteran officer's face was set in a grim scowl, his eyes narrow with suspicion. "Getting awful cozy with the enemy, aren't we, Dixon?" Hawkins growled, his voice low and menacing. Scott straightened, meeting Hawkins's gaze. "I'm gathering intelligence, sir, as ordered." Hawkins snorted. "Intelligence? Looks more like fraternization to me. You'd better watch yourself, Dixon. Some of us haven't forgotten what we're fighting for." Before Scott could respond, Hawkins shouldered past him, leaving the young tactical officer with a gnawing sense of unease. He pushed the encounter to the back of his mind as he made his way to the bridge, focusing on the task at hand. Captain Reeves stood at the center of the bridge, his weathered face illuminated by the glow of tactical displays. "Dixon," he said as Scott entered, "I need you to walk us through this plan of yours one more time." Scott nodded, calling up a holographic display of the Komar outpost. As he detailed the strategy, he could feel the weight of the crew's skepticism. His plan relied heavily on the element of surprise and unconventional tactics, a far cry from standard human military doctrine. "And you're certain this will work?" Reeves asked, his tone measured. Scott hesitated for a fraction of a second, Cade's insights flashing through his mind. "Yes, sir. The Komar won't expect us to use their own predictive algorithms against them." Reeves studied Scott for a long moment before nodding. "Very well. Make it happen, Lieutenant." As the Defiant dropped out of warp, flanked by the Intrepid and Valiant, Scott's heart raced. The Komar outpost loomed before them, its sleek architecture a stark contrast to the utilitarian design of human ships. "Initiating electromagnetic pulse," Scott announced, his fingers flying across his console. The ship's deflector dish flared to life, sending out a carefully modulated burst of energy. On the main view screen, the lights of the Komar outpost flickered and died. "Now!" Scott called out. "Execute evasive pattern Delta 7. The three human ships sprang into action, their movements a chaotic dance that defied prediction. Shumar energy weapons lashed out, but without their advanced targeting systems, most shots went wide. In the brig, Cade watched the battle unfold on a small monitor. Her initial shock at the humans' tactics gave way to a grudging admiration. There was an artistry to their improvisation, a fluidity that Komar battle simulations had never accounted for. As the battle raged, Scott coordinated the assault with a precision that belied his years. The human ships darted in and out of the Komar's firing solutions, striking key installations with surgical accuracy. Within minutes, it was over. The Komar outpost, its defenses neutralized and its command structure in disarray, surrendered. A cheer went up on the Defiance bridge, but Scott felt no elation. His thoughts were with Cade, wondering how she was processing this defeat. Captain Reeves clapped Scott on the shoulder. "Excellent work, Lieutenant. Your unconventional approach paid off." As the adrenaline of battle faded, the reality of their situation set in. They had captured a Komar outpost with minimal casualties on both sides, a feat that would no doubt be celebrated throughout human space. But for Scott, the victory felt hollow. He made his way back to Cade's quarters, unsure of what he would say. When he entered, he found her standing at the viewport, her alien features unreadable. "Your tactics were effective," she said without turning. "I underestimated your species' capacity for adaptation." Scott stepped closer, his voice low. "Cade, I want you to know that I never meant to—" She held up a limb, silencing him. "You did what was necessary for your people, as would I." Their conversation was cut short as the door slid open, revealing Lieutenant Commander Hawkins flanked by two security officers. By order of Captain Reeves, the prisoner is to be transferred to high security holding, Hawkins announced, a note of triumph in his voice. As the security officers moved to escort Keed away, Scott felt a surge of protest rising in his throat. But Keed met his eyes, her gaze steady and resigned. "Until we meet again, Scott Dixon," she said, allowing herself to be led away. Scott watched her go, a storm of emotions churning within him. He had won the battle, but as he stood alone in the empty room, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had lost something far more valuable. The Defiant's engines hummed to life, setting a course for human space. As the stars streaked by outside, Scott found himself at a crossroads, torn between duty and the unexpected connection he had formed with an alien he was supposed to see as the enemy. The captured Kyomar outpost receded into the distance, a symbol of their victory. But for Scott, it marked the beginning of a far more complex and personal conflict, one that would challenge everything he thought he knew about loyalty, duty, and the true cost of war. The captured Kyomar outpost receded into the distance, a symbol of their victory. But for Scott, it marked the beginning of a far more complex and personal conflict, one that would challenge everything he thought he knew about loyalty, duty, and the true cost of war. As the Defiant cruised through the vast expanse of space, the initial euphoria of their successful mission gave way to a simmering tension. Scott noticed the sideways glances and hushed conversations that ceased abruptly when he entered a room. He could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on him, especially from Lieutenant Commander Hawkins. One evening, as Scott made his way to the mess hall, he overheard Hawkins speaking in low, urgent tones to a group of crewmen. "It's not right," Hawkins was saying. "We can't trust that alien. Who knows what kind of information she's gathering, right under our noses." Scott paused, his hand hovering over the door control. He took a deep breath, steeling himself before entering. The conversation died instantly, replaced by the clatter of utensils and forced small talk. Hawkins looked up, his eyes narrowing. "Well, if it isn't our resident Kyomar expert," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Come to share more of your alien girlfriend's secrets?" Scott felt his jaw clench, but he kept his voice level. "Keed has provided valuable intelligence that helped us succeed in our mission, sir. I believe her continued cooperation could be instrumental in ending this conflict." Hawkins snorted. "Cooperation? Is that what we're calling it now?" He stood, closing the distance between them. "Let me remind you, Lieutenant, that we are at war. Your job is to follow orders and protect humanity, not cozy up to the enemy." Before Scott could respond, Captain Reeves's voice crackled over the intercom. "Lieutenant Dixon, report to my ready room immediately." Scott turned on his heel, grateful for the interruption. As he left, he could feel Hawkins' glare burning into his back. In the captain's ready room, Reeves looked weary. He gestured for Scott to sit. "I've received orders from Earth Command," he said without preamble. "They want us to transfer Keed to a high-security detention facility for further interrogation." Scott felt his heart sink. "Sir, I don't think that's the best course of action. Keed has been cooperative, and I believe she could be invaluable in improving our understanding of Kyomar culture and technology." Reeves sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "I understand your position, Dixon, but the brass is under pressure. They want results, and they see Keed as a potential goldmine of information." Scott leaned forward, his mind racing. "Captain, what if we proposed an alternative? Instead of imprisoning Keed, we could use her as a cultural ambassador. Her unique perspective could be crucial in finding a peaceful resolution to this conflict." Reeves raised an eyebrow. "That's a bold proposal, Lieutenant. What makes you think it would work?" Scott's words tumbled out in a rush of passion. "Sir, in my interactions with Keed, I've seen a genuine curiosity about human culture. She's not just cooperative, she's eager to learn. And she's shared insights about Kyomar society that suggest not all of her people support this war. If we can leverage that, we might be able to open diplomatic channels." The captain was silent for a long moment, considering. Finally, he nodded slowly. "It's a long shot, Dixon, but I'll present your idea to my superiors. However," he added, his tone growing stern, If they reject it, Keed will be transferred immediately. Is that understood? Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, Scott replied, feeling a glimmer of hope. Over the next few days, as they awaited the decision, Scott spent even more time with Kide. He found himself looking forward to their conversations, which often stretched for hours as they delved into discussions about their respective cultures and sciences. Your species' approach to astrophysics is fascinating, Kide said one afternoon, her multifaceted eyes gleaming with excitement as they pored over a star chart. You make intuitive leaps that our algorithms would never predict. Scott grinned. And your understanding of quantum mechanics is light years ahead of ours. Imagine what we could accomplish if our scientists worked together. As they talked, Scott couldn't help but notice the graceful movements of Keed's upper limbs as she gestured, or the way her alien features seemed to soften when she smiled. He found himself wondering what it would be like to touch her strange, iridescent skin. Their growing closeness did not go unnoticed. Hawkins's campaign against Keed's presence intensified, and Scott often heard mutters of traitor and alien lover as he walked the corridors. The tension reached a boiling point as the Defiant approached Earth. Captain Reeves called Scott to the bridge, his face grave. We've received a transmission from Admiral Rodriguez, he announced. Scott's heart raced as he waited for the news that would determine Kide's fate, and possibly the future of human-Comar relations. Admiral Rodriguez's weathered face appeared on the console. Captain Reeves, Lieutenant Dixon, she began, her voice crisp and authoritative. I have reviewed your proposal regarding the Comar prisoner, Kide. Scott held his breath, acutely aware of the eyes of the entire bridge crew upon him. In light of recent developments, the Admiral continued, I have decided to approve your request to use Keed as a cultural ambassador. A wave of relief washed over Scott, but it was short-lived. However, Rodriguez added, her eyes locking onto Scott, this comes with conditions. Lieutenant Dixon, you will personally oversee Keed's integration and be held responsible for her actions during the diplomatic process. The success or failure of this initiative rests squarely on your shoulders. Scott straightened, feeling the weight of responsibility settling upon him. I understand, Admiral. I won't let you down. As the transmission ended, Scott became aware of the mix of emotions on the faces around him, hope, skepticism, and in Hawkins' case, barely concealed fury. The Defiant docked at Earth's orbital station, and Scott found himself facing a new set of challenges. He had to prepare Keed for her role as a cultural ambassador while navigating the complex world of interspecies diplomacy and managing his own growing feelings for her. As they stood together in the airlock, preparing to disembark, Scott turned to Keed. Are you ready for this? He asked softly. Keed's multifaceted eyes met his, a swirl of emotions visible in their depths. I am nervous, she admitted, her translator struggling to convey the nuance of her feelings. But I am also hopeful. This is an opportunity to not just save myself, but to potentially end the conflict between our species. Scott nodded, resisting the urge to take her hand. Remember what we discussed about human diplomatic protocols? And be prepared for some hostility. Not everyone will be happy about this arrangement. The airlock cycled open, revealing a crowd of human officials, journalists, and curious onlookers. Cameras flashed and a buzz of excited murmurs filled the air. As they took their first steps onto the station, Scott felt the weight of history upon them. He glanced at Kide, seeing the persistence in her alien features, and knew that their real challenge was just beginning. Together they faced the crowd, ready to embark on a journey that could reshape the future of both their species. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with political minefields and personal conflicts. But in that moment, standing side by side, Scott felt a glimmer of hope for the future. The bright lights of the orbital station's docking bay cast long shadows as Scott and Kide stepped off the Defiant. A cacophony of voices and the rapid-fire clicks of camera shutters assaulted their senses. Scott instinctively moved closer to Keed, his eyes scanning the crowd for any signs of hostility. Lieutenant Dixon, how do you respond to accusations that you're compromising Earth's security? A reporter shouted, thrusting a microphone towards them. Before Scott could answer, a stern-faced woman in an admiral's uniform strode forward, flanked by a security detail. Lieutenant Dixon, Keyed, welcome to Earth Orbital Station Alpha. I'm Admiral Elena Rodriguez. Please, follow me. As they walked, Scott noticed the mix of curiosity and fear in the eyes of the onlookers. He heard hushed whispers and saw fingers pointing at Cad. The Comar seemed unfazed, her multifaceted eyes taking in every detail of her surroundings. Your arrival has caused quite a stir, Admiral Rodriguez said as they entered a secure briefing room. I hope you're prepared for what's ahead. Over the next few days, Scott and Cade found themselves thrust into a whirlwind of high-level meetings and briefings. They sat across from Earth's top military brass and political leaders, fielding questions about Comar technology, culture, and intentions. During one particularly tense session, a gruff general leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. How do we know this isn't some elaborate Comar ploy to gather intelligence on our defenses? Cade's translator hummed as she responded, her voice calm and measured. If that were our intention, General, we would not have shared our advanced shielding technology, which your scientists are currently studying. Our goal is mutual understanding and peace. Scott watched as the general's expression shifted from suspicion to grudging respect. It was a small victory, but he knew they had a long way to go. As they left the meeting, Scott noticed a crowd gathering outside the government building. Signs bobbed above the throng, Earth for humans, and no aliens on our planet. At the center of the commotion stood a charismatic man in an expensive suit, his voice booming through a megaphone. That's Senator Victor Hawthorne, Admiral Rodriguez said, her lips pressed into a thin line. He's been stirring up anti-alien sentiment since your arrival was announced. Scott felt a surge of protectiveness as he saw the hatred in some of the protesters' eyes. We should go another way, he suggested, placing a hand on Keed's shoulder. But Keed stepped forward, her alien features set in a determined expression. No, Scott, we must face this. It is part of the process. As they approached, Senator Hawthorne's voice grew louder. We cannot trust the very beings who have been trying to destroy us. This ambassador is nothing more than a spy, sent to weaken us from within. The crowd roared its approval, but Keed didn't flinch. She walked straight up to the senator, her translator projecting her voice clearly. Senator Hawthorne, I understand your fear, but I am here to build bridges, not to destroy them. If you would speak with me, you might find we have more in common than you think. The senator faltered, clearly unprepared for a direct confrontation. As cameras flashed around them, capturing the moment, Scott saw a flicker of uncertainty cross Hawthorne's face. Later that evening, as Scott and Cade prepared for their next day of meetings, a message from the Defiant arrived. Lieutenant Commander Hawkins had launched an official inquiry into Scott's conduct during the Comar outpost raid. He's claiming I shared classified information with you, Scott explained, running a hand through his hair in frustration. He's been looking for a way to discredit me since we left the Defiant. Keed's alien features contorted in what Scott had come to recognize as concern. This could jeopardize everything we've worked for. We'll face it together, Scott assured her, surprised by the depth of emotion in his own voice. As the days passed, Scott found himself growing closer to Keed. Their late-night strategy sessions often turned into deep discussions about their respective cultures, hopes, and fears. He was fascinated by her perspective on the universe and found himself sharing thoughts he'd never voiced to anyone before. One night, as they stood on the observation deck of the station, Earth glowing blue and green below them, Cade turned to Scott. Your world is beautiful, she said softly. I understand now why your people fight so hard to protect it. Scott felt a rush of warmth at her words. Cade, His response was cut short by the arrival of Admiral Rodriguez. Lieutenant, we've got a situation. Senator Hawthorne has managed to push through approval for a global broadcast. He wants Cade to address the entire human population. Scott's mind raced. This could be either a disaster or the breakthrough they needed. When? Tomorrow, the Admiral replied. I suggest you both get some rest. It's going to be a big day. As Scott and Cade worked through the night to prepare her speech, neither of them could have anticipated the events that would unfold. The next morning, as they entered the broadcast studio, Scott noticed a technician he didn't recognize fiddling with some equipment. Trusting his instincts, Scott approached the man. "Excuse me, could I see your credentials?" The technician's eyes widened, and he reached into his jacket. Scott reacted instantly, tackling the man to the ground as he pulled out a weapon. Security swarmed the area, quickly subduing the would-be assassin and his accomplices. As the dust settled, Scott realized the cameras had been rolling the entire time. Millions around the world had just witnessed him saving Keed's life. Keed, displaying remarkable composure, stepped up to the podium. "People of Earth," she began, her translator conveying the sincerity in her voice, "what you have just witnessed is a testament to the best of humanity. Lieutenant Scott Dixon acted not out of fear or hatred, but out of a desire to protect. It is this spirit of cooperation and understanding that I hope will guide our two species towards a peaceful future." Her words, combined with the dramatic events that had just unfolded, had a profound impact. Social media exploded with supportive messages, and even Senator Hawthorne was forced to acknowledge the bravery displayed by both Scott and Keed. In the days that followed, public opinion began to shift. The foiled assassination attempt had humanized Keed in the eyes of many, and Scott's actions had demonstrated the potential for human-Komar cooperation. As news of the events reached the Komar homeworld, it sparked a political shift. A moderate faction gained traction, advocating for full-scale peace negotiations with humans. Their proposal of a joint scientific mission to explore a newly discovered star system gained rapid support. Admiral Rodriguez saw the opportunity and seized it. She summoned Scott and Keed to her office, her eyes bright with excitement. "We're commissioning a new ship for this mission," she announced, "the UES Harmony, and I want you, Lieutenant Dixon, to lead the human contingent." Scott felt a mix of elation and trepidation. "What about the inquiry into my conduct?" The Admiral's expression turned serious. "Consider this mission your tribunal, Dixon. The outcome will depend on your performance." As Scott and Keed boarded the Harmony, they paused on the observation deck. Earth and the Komar homeworld were visible as distant points of light among the stars. The ship hummed with activity as the joint human-Komar crew prepared for departure. Keed's alien hand brushed against Scott's. "Are you ready for this, Scott Dixon?" Scott looked at her, seeing the vastness of space reflected in her multifaceted eyes. He thought about the challenges they'd faced and the ones that lay ahead. The fate of two species might rest on the success of this mission. "With you?" "Always," he replied, his voice steady with determination. As the Harmony's engines roared to life, Scott and Keed turned their gaze to the star-filled expanse before them, ready to embark on the next chapter of their extraordinary journey. Adventure. As the Harmony's engines hummed to life, Scott felt a surge of excitement and apprehension. The ship smoothly detached from Earth Orbital Station Alpha and began its journey into the uncharted star system. Days into their voyage, the ship's sensors began picking up unusual readings. Scott leaned forward in his captain's chair, studying the holographic display. "Lieutenant Zhang, what are we looking at?" he asked. The young officer's fingers flew over her console. "Sir, it appears to be a dense asteroid field. Our initial scans didn't detect it due to some kind of electromagnetic interference." Scott's mind raced. They were traveling too fast to stop or change course completely. He glanced at Keed, who stood beside him, her alien features set in concentration. "Keed, does Komar technology have any way to safely navigate this?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not at this velocity, Scott. Our ships typically avoid such areas entirely." Scott nodded, a plan forming in his mind. "All right, all hands brace for evasive maneuvers. Lieutenant Zhang, transfer helm control to my station." As Scott took control, the asteroid field loomed before them, a chaotic dance of rock and ice. He began to weave the Harmony through the debris, his hands steady on the controls. The ship shuddered as smaller fragments impacted their shields. "Shields at 80% and holding," reported the Komar engineer, Takal. Scott's focus narrowed to the task at hand. He used the asteroid's own gravitational fields to slingshot the Harmony between the larger bodies, conserving power and maintaining their speed. The human and Komar crew watched in awe as their captain guided them through the seemingly impassable field. After several tense minutes, they emerged on the other side. A collective sigh of relief echoed through the bridge. "Damage report," Scott called out. "Minor hull breaches on decks 3 and 7 already sealed," Zhang responded. "No casualties. Shields regenerating." Cad placed a hand on Scott's shoulder. "That was impressive, Scott Dixon. You've earned the respect of the Komar crew today." Before Scott could respond, an alert chimed from the science station. "Captain, we're detecting an Earth-like planet within the system's habitable zone," the officer announced. As they approached the planet, its blue-green surface reminded Scott of Earth. However, strange energy readings emanating from the surface piqued their curiosity. "We need to investigate those readings," Scott decided. "Prepare a landing party, mixed team, human, and Komar." Hours later, Scott led the team out of their shuttle onto the planet's surface. The air was breathable, with a sweet, unfamiliar scent. Lush vegetation surrounded them, but in the distance they could see the angular shapes of artificial structures. As they approached the ruins, Scott felt a sense of awe. The structures were clearly not of human or Komar origin. Towering spires of an unknown metallic substance reached towards the sky, their surfaces etched with intricate swirling patterns. "These must be thousands of years old," Keed observed, her translator conveying a sense of wonder. They cautiously entered one of the structures. Inside, they found walls covered in alien symbols and what appeared to be control panels, still pulsing with a faint light. Scott and Keed worked side by side, attempting to decipher the symbols. Their different perspectives and knowledge bases complemented each other, allowing them to make progress where neither could have alone. "Look at this," Keid said, pointing to a recurring symbol. "It resembles the Komar glyph for unity, but with additional complexity." Scott nodded, excitement building. "And here, this sequence is similar to human binary code, but in base 8 instead of base 2. As they continued their analysis, a loud rumble shook the structure. Scott's communicator crackled to life. "Captain Dixon, this is the Harmony. We have a situation," Lieutenant Zhang's voice came through, tense and worried. Scott felt a knot form in his stomach. "Go ahead, Lieutenant." "Two ships have entered the system. One is the USS Prometheus, commanded by Admiral James Hawthorne. The other is a Komar warship, the Vornthal. The Prometheus is demanding we cease operations and surrender Keed for interrogation." Scott's eyes sharp. He looked at Keed, whose alien features had gone still with concern. "Zhang, inform Admiral Hawthorne that Keed is part of a sanctioned diplomatic mission. We will not comply with his demand." "Sir, the Admiral is threatening military action if we don't cooperate." Scott's mind raced, considering their options. The ruins around them suddenly seemed more important than ever. "Keep them talking, Zhang. We might have a solution down here." He turned to Cade and the rest of the landing party. "We need to figure out this technology fast. It might be our only chance to prevent a war." As they redoubled their efforts to understand the alien systems, Scott couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The ancient ruins held secrets that could change everything. If only they could unlock them before it was too late. In orbit, the three ships maintained an uneasy standoff. On the planet's surface, the race to unravel the mysteries of a long-dead civilization took on a new urgency. Scott knew that their next actions would shape the future of human-Komar relations, and possibly the fate of both their species. With Keed at his side, he prepared to face the greatest challenge of his career. Scott's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the ancient ruins around them. The weathered structures loomed, silent witnesses to the unfolding drama. He turned to Keed, her alien features set with drive. "We need to set this up carefully," he said, gesturing to a circular clearing amidst the crumbling edifices. "This could be our one shot at preventing a war." Keed nodded, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the strange, pulsing light from the alien technology. "Agreed. We must create an environment that encourages dialogue, not confrontation." They worked quickly, arranging fallen stone blocks into a rough circle. Scott positioned himself at what he hoped would serve as a neutral point between the human and Komar delegations. The distant hum of approaching shuttles signaled the arrival of the other parties. Admiral James Hawthorne was the first to emerge from his craft, flanked by a squad of heavily armed guards. His weathered face was set in a grim expression as he approached the makeshift meeting area. Commander Zalthor of the Komar warship Vornthal followed shortly after, his own security detail fanning out behind him. Scott stepped forward, keeping his voice level. Admiral Hawthorne, Commander Zalthor, thank you for agreeing to this meeting. Hawthorne's eyes darted to Keed. Let's cut to the chase, Dixon. I want that alien turned over to us immediately. We can't risk Komar interference in human affairs. Zalthor bristled, his translator conveying his indignation. Interference? It is you humans who have no right to be in this system. We demand your immediate withdrawal. Scott raised his hands, trying to calm the rising tensions. Gentlemen, please, we're here to find a peaceful resolution. There's more at stake here than just our immediate concerns. The negotiations that followed were tense, with both sides refusing to budge from their positions. Hawthorne insisted on Keed's arrest and exclusive human rights to study the alien ruins. Zalthor countered by demanding all human ships leave the system immediately. As the arguments grew more heated, Scott caught Keed's eye. She nodded subtly, and they quietly slipped away from the main group. We need to find something to break this deadlock, Scott muttered as they ventured deeper into the ruins. Their footsteps echoed in the eerie silence as they explored further than they had before. Suddenly, Keed stopped, her hand brushing against a section of wall covered in swirling patterns. Scott, look at this, she said, her voice hushed with excitement. As if responding to her touch, the wall slid open, revealing a hidden chamber. Inside, they found a console pulsing with soft blue light. Scott and Keed exchanged a glance before approaching it cautiously. Working together, they managed to activate the device. A holographic projection filled the room, depicting a humanoid figure with features unlike any species they had encountered. The alien spoke, its words translated by some unknown mechanism. We are the Proteans. Long ago, we faced a crisis similar to yours. Two species, locked in conflict, unable to see past their differences. The technology we developed here was meant to bridge that gap, to foster understanding between different races. Scott and Keed listened, transfixed, as the message continued, warning of greater cosmic threats that required unity to overcome. As the hologram faded, Scott turned to Keed, his eyes wide. This changes everything. We need to show this to the others. They rushed back to the negotiation site, where tensions had only escalated in their absence. Admiral Hawthorne, Commander Zalthor, Scott called out, slightly out of breath. We've made a discovery that you need to see. He quickly explained what they had found, emphasizing the Protean message of cooperation. As he spoke, he could see the shift in the delegates' expressions, from skepticism to curiosity. Think about it, Scott continued, his voice gaining strength. This technology could benefit both our species. But more than that, it's a call to unite against greater challenges we might face in the future. Admiral Hawthorne frowned, but Scott could see the wheels turning in his mind. And you propose we study this technology together? Exactly, Keed chimed in. Our combined knowledge and skills would be far more effective than working separately. Commander Zalthor tilted his head, a gesture Scott had come to recognize as thoughtful consideration. The humans have shown unexpected adaptability in our encounters. Perhaps there is merit in this proposal. As the negotiations took on a new direction, focused on collaborative research, a series of tremors shook the ground beneath them. Scott's communicator crackled to life with an urgent message from the Harmony. Captain, we're detecting massive energy fluctuations from the planet's core. It seems the activation of the Protean systems has triggered some kind of chain reaction. Scott's mind raced. What about the energy shield protecting the planet? It's becoming unstable, sir. If it collapses, we'll all be exposed to lethal levels of radiation. Scott looked at the assembled delegates, seeing the same realization dawn on their faces. This crisis demanded immediate action. We need to work together on this, Scott announced. Human and Komar engineers, pool your resources. We need to stabilize that shield. What followed was a frantic race against time. Scott coordinated the efforts, bringing together the best minds from both species. Keed's expertise proved invaluable as they worked to integrate their technologies with the ancient Protean systems. Hours passed in a blur of calculations, adjustments, and tense moments as the shield fluctuated dangerously. Finally, with a surge of power, the shield not only stabilized but expanded, covering a wider area of the planet's surface. As the immediate danger passed, Scott noticed a change in the atmosphere between the human and Komar teams. The shared experience of averting disaster had forged a new understanding between them. Admiral Hawthorne approached Scott, his expression softened. "I've seen what we can achieve together. Perhaps it's time we considered a more permanent alliance." Commander Zalthor nodded in agreement. The Proteans were wise. United, we are stronger than we could ever be alone. As discussions continued, a new agreement began to take shape. A joint human Komar research team would be established to study the Protean ruins, with Scott and Keed appointed as co-leaders. However, even as they celebrated this breakthrough, Scott's communicator beeped with an urgent message. "Captain, we're detecting unauthorized data transmissions from the Prometheus. It appears someone is leaking classified information about past human-Komar conflicts." Scott's face hardened. The fight for peace was far from finished. As he shared a concerned glance with Keed, he knew that their real challenge was just beginning. They had made progress here on this alien world, but changing hearts and minds across two vast civilizations would be a far greater task. Scott's fist tight as he read the urgent message on his communicator. The unauthorized data transmissions from the Prometheus threatened to unravel everything they had accomplished. He turned to Kaid, her alien features mirroring his concern. "We've got a problem," he said, his voice low. "Someone's leaking classified information about past human-Komar conflicts." Keed's multifaceted eyes narrowed. This could undo all our progress. Before they could discuss further, Scott's communicator buzzed again. It was a priority transmission from Earth. As he listened, his expression darkened. "Senator Victor Hawthorne is using the leaked information to launch a campaign against our peace initiative," Scott explained, his voice tight with frustration. "He's calling me a traitor and demanding my arrest." Keed tilted her head, a gesture Scott had come to recognize as her processing new information. "Similar opposition is arising on my homeworld. High Commander Vextor is rallying against our cooperation." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Admiral Elena Rodriguez, their strongest ally, was recalled to Earth to defend the joint mission before a special committee. Without her support, Scott and Kaid found themselves in an increasingly precarious position. As they worked to stabilize the political situation, Scott and Keed pressed forward with their research on the Protean ruins. Their persistence paid off when the team discovered a vast underground complex beneath the surface. Scott led the way into the cavernous space, his flashlight beam revealing gleaming metal surfaces untouched by time. "This technology, it's light years beyond anything we've seen," he breathed, examining a pulsing energy core. Keed nodded, her fingers dancing over an alien control panel. "This power generation method could revolutionize both our civilizations." Their exploration was cut short when an automated defense system suddenly activated. Energy barriers sprung to life, trapping half of the research team behind impenetrable walls of light. "Everyone stay calm," Scott shouted, assessing the situation. He turned to Keed. "We need to combine our knowledge to bypass these security measures." What followed was an intense rescue operation. Scott's human ingenuity meshed with Keed's Komar technical expertise as they worked to deactivate the ancient defenses. Hours passed in a blur of problem-solving and near misses. Finally, with a satisfying hum, the barriers dissolved. The trapped researchers stumbled out, shaken but unharmed. As Scott helped the last team member to safety, Keed called out from deeper within the complex. "Scott, you need to see this." He hurried over to find Keed standing before a holographic display. It showed detailed star charts of nearby galaxies, far more comprehensive than anything humans or Komar had mapped. "There's more," Keed said, her voice filled with a mix of awe and trepidation. She manipulated the controls, bringing up a new image. A voice, neither human nor Komar, filled the chamber. "We, the Proteans, left this warning for those who would follow. Beware the Void Eaters, a force of cosmic destruction. It is they who drove us from our homes, forced us to seek refuge in distant stars. Scott and Keed exchanged glances, the weight of this revelation settling upon them. Their mission had just taken on a new level of urgency. As news of the rescue operation and the Protean warning spread, some of the political opposition quieted. However, Senator Hawthorne and High Commander Vextor were not so easily swayed. They formed an unlikely alliance, united in their desire to end human-Comar cooperation. Scott was in the middle of analyzing Protean data when his communicator chimed. His blood ran cold as he listened to the message. "They've reconvened my military tribunal," he told Kied, his voice tight. "I'm being ordered back to Earth to face charges of sharing classified information with the enemy." Keed's alien features set with dedication. "I'm coming with you. My testimony could make a difference." Before they could make arrangements to leave, alarms blared throughout the research base. Captain James Reeves of the UES Defiant appeared on the main view screen, his expression grim. "A combined fleet of human and Comar ships has entered the system," Reeves reported. "They're demanding the surrender of the base and your immediate arrest." Scott's mind raced. They couldn't abandon their mission now, not with the threat of the Void Eaters looming. His eyes fell on the Protean power core they had been studying. "Captain Reeves, can you buy us some time?" Scott asked. Reeves nodded. "We'll do our best to intercept them, but we're outnumbered." As the Defiant moved to engage the hostile fleet, Scott turned to Keed and the research team. "We're going to create an energy shield around the entire star system using the Protean technology." Keed's eyes widened. The power requirements would be enormous. "Exactly," Scott said. "It'll protect us and demonstrate what we can achieve together." The next hours were a frenzy of activity. Keed led the team in adapting the Protean technology, while Scott coordinated with Captain Reeves. The hostile fleet drew closer, weapons charged. As the first enemy shots streaked towards the planet, Scott held his breath. "Now, Keed!" With a surge of energy that made the air crackle, an enormous barrier sprang to life around the star system. The incoming weapons fire dissipated harmlessly against its surface. A stunned silence fell over the command center. Scott opened a channel to all ships in the system. "This is what we can accomplish together," he said, his voice steady, "and we'll need this unity more than ever. The Proteans warned us of a threat called the Void Eaters. We face a common enemy that could destroy us all if we don't stand united." As Scott's words hung in the air, the situation remained tense. The hostile fleet had been stymied, but not defeated. The charges against Scott still stood, and Keed's decision to support him had put her at odds with her own government. Yet as they stood side by side, human and Comar united in purpose, Scott felt a glimmer of hope. They had bought themselves time. Now they needed to use it wisely to ensure the survival of both their species. Now they needed to use it wisely to ensure the survival of both their civilizations. The massive energy shield pulsed with an otherworldly glow, its shimmering surface a testament to the power of human-Comar cooperation. Scott Dixon stood at the command center's viewport, his eyes fixed on the hostile fleet now rendered impotent beyond the barrier. "Open a channel to all ships in the system," Scott ordered, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. As the communication officer complied, Scott took a deep breath. This was their chance to change everything. He began to speak, his words broadcast to every vessel within range. "This is Captain Scott Dixon of the UES Prometheus. What you've just witnessed is the activation of Protean technology, adapted through joint human and Comar efforts. But this shield isn't just a defensive measure. It's a warning." Scott paused, allowing his words to sink in. He could almost feel the tension radiating from the hostile ships outside the barrier. "We've uncovered evidence of a cosmic threat known as the Void Eaters. This force drove the Proteans, an advanced civilization, from their homes. They left behind this technology and a warning for those who would follow." As Scott spoke, Keed manipulated the controls beside him, transmitting data packets containing proof of their claims to all ships in the vicinity. The command center fell silent, save for the soft beeps of incoming transmissions as the recipients processed the information. "In light of this discovery, I propose an emergency summit aboard the UES Defiant," Scott continued. "We need to discuss this threat and the importance of continued human-Comar cooperation. The survival of both our species may depend on it. As Scott concluded his broadcast, the command center erupted into a flurry of activity. Communications officers relayed responses from the various ships, many expressing confusion and uncertainty. The hostile fleet remained in orbit, but their aggressive posture had noticeably relaxed. Keed approached Scott, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the glow of the energy shield. "A bold move," she said, her voice a mix of admiration and concern. "But will it be enough?" Scott nodded grimly. "It has to be. We need to compile everything we have on the Protean technology and the Void Eaters. If we're going to convince them, we need irrefutable evidence." The next hours were a whirlwind of activity. Scott and Keid led their team in a frantic effort to organize their findings. As they worked, a startling discovery emerged from the Protean archives. "Scott, look at this," Keid called out, her fingers dancing over a holographic display. The Proteans didn't just leave us warnings. They were working on a weapon system to combat the Void Eaters. Scott leaned in, studying the complex schematics. "It's incomplete," he observed. Keid nodded. "Yes, but look at the design. It incorporates principles from both human and Komar technology. It's as if they knew we'd need to work together to complete it," Scott finished, the implications sending a shiver down his spine. As preparations for the summit continued, tensions remained high. The hostile fleet had withdrawn to a respectful distance, but maintained a watchful presence. On board the Defiant, Captain James Reeves oversaw the conversion of the ship's main conference room into a suitable venue for the historic meeting. Scott and Keid arrived on the Defiant just as the first delegations began to transport aboard. The atmosphere was thick with suspicion and terrifying hostility as human and Komar representatives eyed each other warily. As Scott prepared to address the assembled leaders, his communicator chimed with an urgent message. His blood ran cold as he read the contents. "Keid," he whispered, pulling her aside, "we have a problem. Senator Hawthorne and High Commander Vexistor have dispatched a covert team to the research base. They're planning to destroy the Protean archive and sabotage the shield's power source." Keid's alien features hardened with drive. "We can't let that happen. But the summit—" "We'll have to split up," Scott decided quickly. "I'll start the presentation. You take a security team and head back to the planet. I'll join you as soon as I can." As Keid departed, Scott took his place at the head of the conference table. The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on him. He began to speak, presenting the evidence they had gathered with a calm urgency that belied the turmoil in his gut. Holographic displays flickered to life, showing the devastating power of the Void Eaters. Scott watched as expressions of skepticism gave way to shock and fear. He was just explaining the partially completed weapon system when alarms blared throughout the ship. "Captain Dixon," Reeves's voice came over the intercom, "we're detecting weapons fire at the research base." Scott's heart raced. "I need to get down there," he announced to the stunned delegates. "What you decide here could determine the fate of both our species, but right now, I have a base to defend." Without waiting for a response, Scott sprinted from the room. He assembled a joint human-Kyomar security team en route to the transporter room, grateful for the handful of Kyomar officers who volunteered despite the uncertain situation. They materialized in the underground complex to find chaos. Energy weapons fire crisscrossed the cavernous space as Keid's team engaged the saboteurs. The air was thick with the acrid smell of ozone and burning circuitry. Scott spotted Keid taking cover behind a fallen column. He signaled to his team, and they moved to flank the attackers. "Keid," he called out as he slid into position beside her. "Status report." "They're trying to reach the main power core," she shouted over the din of battle. "If they succeed, the entire shield will collapse." Scott nodded, his mind racing. "I'll lead a team to confront them directly. Can you get to the control room and stabilize the power source?" Keid's multifaceted eyes met his, a moment of understanding passing between them. "Be careful, Scott," she said before darting away, her lithe form weaving through the debris. Scott gathered a small strike team and pressed forward. They fought their way through the complex, the sounds of battle echoing off the ancient walls. As they approached the main chamber housing the power core, Scott caught sight of a familiar face leading the saboteurs. Hawkins? He gasped, recognizing his former rival from the Defiant. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Hawkins turned, his expression a mixture of surprise and fierce dedication. "Stand down, Dixon," he growled. "You don't understand what you're interfering with." "I understand plenty," Scott retorted, his weapon trained on Hawkins. "You're working for Senator Hawthorne, trying to destroy our best chance at survival against a threat that could wipe out both our species." Hawkins sneered. "Always the idealist, aren't you? There's more at stake here than your alien love affair." Scott's team spread out, covering the entrances to the chamber. The saboteurs clustered around Hawkins, weapons at the ready. The standoff stretched on, the only sound the ominous hum of the power core. "Think about what you're doing, Marcus," Scott pleaded. "The Void Eaters are real. They're coming. We need this technology to have any hope of stopping them." For a moment, doubt flickered across Hawkins' face. Then his expression hardened. "No," he snarled, reaching for a device on his belt. "I have my orders." Time seemed to slow as Hawkins activated the bomb. Scott lunged forward, knowing he was too far away to stop him. Suddenly, a blur of motion caught his eye. Keed appeared as if from nowhere, her hands a flurry of movement over the bomb's control panel. Hawkins turned, raising his weapon, but Scott was faster. His shot caught Hawkins in the shoulder, sending him sprawling. "It's done," Keed announced, her voice tight with tension. "Bomb disarmed." As Scott's team moved to secure the saboteurs, he approached Keed. "Nice timing," he said, the relief evident in his voice. Keid tilted her head, a gesture Scott had come to recognize as her equivalent of a smile. "The power core is stable," she reported, "and I've managed to boost the shield's strength by another 15%. As the adrenaline of battle faded, Scott became aware of his communicator buzzing insistently. He activated it to find Captain Reeves on the other end. "Dixon, you need to get back up here," Reeves said, his voice urgent but tinged with something else. "Hope? The summit? Things are changing. Fast." Scott exchanged a glance with Keed. Whatever had happened in their absence, it was clear that the game had changed. As they prepared to return to the Defiant, Scott couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of a new era. The real challenge, he realized, was only just beginning. As Scott and Keed materialized on the transporter pad of the UES Defiant, Captain Reeves rushed to meet them. "The summit has taken an unexpected turn," Reeves said, his voice taut with urgency. "You need to see this." They hurried to the bridge, where a holographic display showed the faces of Earth's highest-ranking officials, alongside the intimidating visages of the Komar High Command. The chamber buzzed with tension as human and alien leaders engaged in heated debate. "How did this happen?" Scott asked, his eyes darting between the displays. "News of the sabotage attempt spread quickly," Reeves explained. "Both sides demanded answers. Now they're calling for you two to present your case directly." Keid's multifaceted eyes narrowed. "We're not prepared for this level of scrutiny." "We don't have a choice," Scott replied, his mind racing. "We need to compile everything we have on the Void Eaters and the Protean technology. How long until we reach Earth?" 18 hours at maximum warp," Reeves answered. Scott nodded grimly. "Then we've got 18 hours to save both our species." The journey to Earth was a whirlwind of activity. Scott, Keid, and Admiral Elena Rodriguez worked tirelessly in the Defiance conference room, sifting through data and constructing their presentation. Holographic displays flickered with images of devastated star systems and complex schematics of Protean technology. "We need to emphasize the immediate threat," Rodriguez insisted, her weathered face etched with concern. "If we can't make them understand the danger, none of the rest matters." As they neared Earth, Scott stared out the viewport at the blue-green orb of his homeworld. The sight that had once filled him with comfort now seemed fragile, vulnerable to cosmic forces beyond their comprehension. Keid approached, her alien features softened by concern. "You're troubled," she observed. Scott nodded. "Everything we've worked for comes down to this. If we fail..." Keid's hand brushed his arm, in gesture of comfort that sent an electric thrill through him. "We won't fail," she said simply. The Defiant entered Earth's orbit amidst a flurry of activity. News of their arrival spread rapidly, and as they descended to the surface in a shuttle, Scott could see the crowds gathering below. Supporters waved signs emblazoned with messages of unity and hope, while nearby, angry protesters demanded his arrest. "Quite a welcoming committee," Rodriguez muttered as they touched down. Security forces formed a tight cordon around them as they made their way to the United Earth Council chambers. The air crackled with tension, punctuated by shouts from the crowd. Scott caught glimpses of signs reading, "No to Alien Alliance," and "Dixon for President." Inside the council chambers, the atmosphere was no less charged. Human counselors sat alongside holographic projections of Comar leaders, their alien features casting an otherworldly glow across the room. At the center of it all stood Senator Hawthorne, his face a mask of scarcely controlled fury. "Captain Dixon," he sneered as Scott approached the podium, "how kind of you to finally grace us with your presence. Are you prepared to answer for your actions?" Scott met the senator's gaze steadily. "I'm prepared to present evidence of a threat that endangers both humanity and the Comar, Senator. I suggest you listen carefully." For the next 2 hours, Scott and Cade laid out their case. They showed footage of the Protean shield in action, presented data on the Void Eater's destruction in neighboring galaxies, and outlined their plan for a joint human-Comar defense initiative. Admiral Rodriguez lent her considerable authority to their testimony, emphasizing the strategic importance of cooperation. As they spoke, Scott could see the impact of their words. Many counselors leaned forward, their expressions shifting from skepticism to concern. Even some of the Comar leaders, initially aloof, began to show signs of interest. But Senator Hawthorne was not so easily swayed. As Scott concluded his presentation, the senator rose, his face flushed with anger. "An impressive fairy tale, Captain," he spat, "but I have evidence of my own." With a flourish, Hawthorne activated a holographic display. It showed what appeared to be communications logs between Scott and Cade, discussing the fabrication of the Void Eater's threat. "As you can see," Hawthorne declared triumphantly, "this entire cosmic danger is nothing more than a hoax perpetrated by Captain Dixon and his alien conspirator. I call for his immediate arrest and the termination of all cooperation with the Comar." The chamber erupted into chaos. Counselors shouted accusations and denials, while the Comar leaders conferred urgently among themselves. Scott felt his heart sink as he watched years of progress unravel before his eyes. Suddenly a voice cut through the din. "I have evidence you need to see." All eyes turned to Captain James Reeves, who strode purposefully to the center of the room. He activated a data pad, and a new holographic display sprang to life. "During the recent crisis," Reeves explained, his voice steady, "long-range sensors on the Defiant detected an anomaly at the edge of our solar system. This is what we found." The display showed a massive void in space, a darkness that seemed to consume light itself. As the assembled leaders watched in stunned silence, the void pulsed and shifted, growing incrementally larger. "This matches exactly with Protean descriptions of the Void Eaters," Reeves concluded, "and it's heading straight for us." The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembly. The Comar High Command, initially skeptical, now engaged in rapid, clicking communication. They turned to address the human counselors, their alien features set with stubborn persistence. "In light of this new evidence," the lead Comar stated, "we propose an immediate expansion of joint research efforts and the formation of a combined defense fleet." Seizing the moment, Scott stepped forward. "I have a plan," he announced, his voice ringing with confidence born of desperation. "Using Protean technology, we can create a network of energy shields around key human and Comar worlds. This will buy us time to develop effective weapons against the Void Eaters." As Scott outlined his proposal, he could see the counselors' expressions changing. Fear gave way to hope, skepticism to willpower. Even Senator Hawthorne fell silent, his earlier bravado deflated by the reality of the threat they faced. But just as momentum seemed to be shifting in their favor, an aide rushed into the chamber, her face pale with urgency. She whispered something to the council president, whose expression darkened. "We've received reports of unrest on several human colonies," the president announced grimly. "Anti-alien sentiment has sparked violence against Comar visitors, and human supporters of the alliance. Similar reports began flooding in from Komar space, where followers of High Commander Vextor were protesting against cooperation with humans. The fragile unity that Scott and Kaid had fought so hard to build seemed to be crumbling before their eyes. The council president's gaze swept the room, settling finally on Scott. "Captain Dixon," she said, her voice heavy with the weight of her office, "it seems the fate of both our species may rest on the decision we make here today. We will put your plan to a vote." As the councilors prepared to cast their ballots, Scott felt Kaid's presence at his side. He turned to find her watching him, her alien features unreadable to most, but to him a clear reflection of his own mix of hope and fear. "Whatever happens," she said softly, "we face it together." Scott nodded, a wave of emotion threatening to overwhelm him. As the votes were tallied, he realized that regardless of the outcome, his journey with Kaid had irrevocably changed him, and perhaps the future of both their species. The council president rose, holding the final tally in her hand. The chamber fell silent as she prepared to announce the result that would shape the course of human and Komar history. The tension in the chamber was palpable as the council president cleared her throat. "By a narrow margin," she announced, "the council has voted to approve Captain Dixon's plan for a joint human-Komar defense initiative against the Void Eaters." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Scott felt Kaid's hand squeeze his arm, a gesture that spoke volumes. Their eyes met, conveying a mix of triumph and trepidation at the monumental task ahead. "We must act swiftly," the council president continued. "Captain Dixon, you and your team will spearhead this operation. The UES Unity will serve as your command vessel." Scott nodded, his mind already racing with the logistics of the mission. "We'll need to coordinate with the Komar fleet and establish a network of shield generators across key systems." As the council session adjourned, Scott, Kaid, and Admiral Rodriguez huddled together, discussing their next steps. The atmosphere was electric with a sense of purpose and urgency. "I'll coordinate with Earth's defense forces," Rodriguez said. "We'll need every available ship and resource." Kaid's multifaceted eyes gleamed with purpose. "I'll liaison with the Komar High Command. We must integrate our technology seamlessly if we're to have any chance of success." Within hours, the UES Unity was prepped for launch. As Scott strode onto the bridge, he was struck by the mix of human and Komar crew members working side by side. Screens flickered with data streams in both languages, a visual representation of their newfound cooperation. "Status report," Scott called out as he settled into the captain's chair. His first officer, Commander Sarah Chen, responded crisply. "All systems go, sir. The Komar vessels are in formation and awaiting your command." Scott nodded, taking a deep breath. "All right, let's do this. Set course for the Proxima Centauri colony. That's where we'll establish our first shield generator." As the Unity broke orbit, Kaid joined Scott on the bridge. "The Komar science team has made progress on adapting the protean shield technology," she reported. "But we'll need to work quickly. Our long-range sensors indicate the Void Eaters are accelerating their approach." The journey to Proxima Centauri was a flurry of activity. Scott coordinated with the fleet, strategizing deployment patterns and defense protocols. Kaid led a joint human-Komar science team, refining the shield technology and running endless simulations. As they neared the colony, alarms blared across the ship. Commander Chen's voice cut through the chaos. "Sir, we're detecting a massive subspace distortion at the edge of the system." Scott's blood ran cold. "It's them. They're here." The view screen flickered to life, revealing a sight that defied comprehension. A vast, pitch-black entity emerged from subspace, its very presence warping the fabric of reality around it. Stars seemed to bend and twist in its vicinity, light itself unable to escape its grasp. "All ships, battle stations," Scott ordered, his voice steady despite the fear gripping his heart. "Initiate shield network, Protocol Alpha." The partially completed shield network hummed to life, creating a funnel of energy that guided the Void Eater towards a predetermined kill zone. Human ships darted and weaved in erratic patterns, confusing the entity's ability to predict their movements. Komar vessels provided precise, calculated fire support, their advanced targeting systems guided by human intuition. On the bridge of the Unity, Scott orchestrated the chaotic dance of ships and energy beams. "Maintain formation, Delta," he commanded. "Keep it off balance." Suddenly, Keed's voice crackled over the comm. "Scott, we've made a breakthrough. The Void Eater's structure is vulnerable to a specific frequency of energy, one we can generate by combining our shield technologies." Scott's mind raced, formulating a plan. "Can we modulate the Unity's shields to emit that frequency?" "Yes, but we'd need to get dangerously close," Kaid replied. Without hesitation, Scott made his decision. "Do it. Commander Chen, plot an intercept course with the Void Eater. All ships provide covering fire and herd that thing towards the system's sun." The Unity surged forward, shields pulsing with the lethal frequency. Human and Komar ships coordinated their efforts, pushing the massive entity closer to the star. As they neared the sun's corona, Scott's hands flew over the controls, executing a series of complex evasive maneuvers. The Void Eater, unable to predict the Unity's erratic path, plunged into the star's outer layers. Cade's voice rang out, "Now, Scott, activate the resonance cascade." Scott slammed his hand down on the console. The modified shield frequency erupted from the Unity, creating a devastating resonance within the Void Eater's structure. The entity writhed, its inky blackness contorting in apparent agony. Then, with a silent implosion that seemed to momentarily dim the star itself, the Void Eater collapsed, consumed by the sun's immense energy. For a moment, silence reigned on the bridge. Then cheers erupted from both human and Komar crew members. Scott sagged in his chair, exhaustion and elation warring within him. Keed appeared at his side, her alien features alight with an emotion Scott had never seen before. "We did it," she said softly, her hand finding his. As the Unity regrouped with the fleet, news of their victory spread rapidly across human and Komar space. The successful cooperation between the two species in the face of a cosmic threat ushered in a new era of peace and collaboration. In the days that followed, Scott found himself thrust into the spotlight as a symbol of this new alliance. He stood before a sea of reporters, human and Komar alike, fielding questions about the battle and the future of their united efforts. "Captain Dixon," one reporter called out, "how do you respond to accusations that this was all an elaborate hoax to force an alliance?" Scott's gaze hardened. "I invite anyone who believes that to review the data from our encounter. The threat was real, and it took the combined efforts of both our species to overcome it. That's not a hoax. It's a testament to what we can achieve together." As the press conference wound down, Scott caught sight of Keed standing at the back of the room. Their eyes met, and a current of understanding passed between them. They had faced the impossible together, and in doing so, discovered something neither had expected, a connection that transcended their differences. Later, as they stood on the observation deck of the Unity, watching the stars streak by, Scott turned to Keed. "So," he said, a hint of his old roguish charm returning, "ready for our next adventure?" Kaid's multifaceted eyes seemed to sparkle. "With you? Always." As the Unity prepared to jump to faster-than-light speed, carrying with it the hopes of two once-warring species, Scott couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come. The journey ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges they could scarcely imagine. But as he felt Kaid's presence beside him, Scott knew that together they were ready to face whatever the universe might throw their way.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.